I want to look at the way in which T.S. Eliot's famous poem, seminal poem, The Wasteland, was changed and improved by Ezra Pound's influence and his actions as editor. It's well known that Ezra Pound had a big hand in the final version of The Wasteland, and Eliot acknowledged that in his dedication to Pound in the poem Miglior Fabbro, the better craftsman. And really, it can be underestimated, even though we know Pound had such a profound hand in the final version, it can still be underestimated just how important Pound's contributions were. It might be said that in some ways Eliot's original was perhaps neo-classical, more neo-classical in concept, and Pound's reworkings tended into a profound symbolist poem, and perhaps the first masterpiece, or definitely the first masterpiece of symbolism. And yeah, his influence was very, very deep on this poem. It seems that Eliot, before the publication of the poet, visited Pound in Paris, where he was living, and the two men went through the poem page by page and decided what should be left in and what should be cast aside. It seems that The Wasteland was originally about double its present length, so Pound convinced Eliot to get rid of a lot. The first section, which Pound criticized, was preceding the burial of the dead, the line about April being the cruelest month. That's not how the poem started. The poem started with a long section on a drunken night in Boston. A group of friends on a drunken night in Boston begins about having a few feelers, and then they go on a kind of pub crawl, a bar crawl, and quite rightly, Pound advised Eliot to get rid of all of that and just cut straight to April is the cruelest month. So without Pound, we'd have all this section about a pub crawl in Boston, and probably the title of the poem would be He'd Do the Police in Different Voices, which is a quote from Dickens. Dickens is our mutual friend. Doesn't quite sound the same, does it? The Wasteland, or He'd Do the Police in Different Voices. So this is profound change brought about by Pound. Thanks to him, now we just cut straight to April is the cruelest month. Seems the biggest problem was the fire sermon. The fire sermon was a bit of a mess when Eliot brought it to Pound. It was the longest section of the poem, and it began with a long section in Pope-like couplets, iambic pentameter, about a lady fresca doing her toilet, and it's a kind of satire on the Rape of the Lock, which is itself a satire. Pound criticized this section quite significantly and convinced Eliot the poem was better if he just cut it out. His essential argument was Pope had done the couplets better, and there was no real point to just continue doing Popian couplets. And Eliot had changed the toilet of Fresca to something more comical that referenced James Joyce's Ulysses. But again, Pound told him it was derivative. Why do something that someone else has done better? That was his argument about the Pope couplets and the references to Joyce's Ulysses. So that whole section was cut out, and with it, a lot of material that would certainly be regarded as racist and misogynist today. So if we take a look at some of the lines that have survived, you can probably see what I mean. If I can find it here. Yeah, so he's talking about Fresca, this kind of Popian Belinda-like figure that Eliot created. The white-armed Fresca blinks and yawns and gapes, aroused from dreams of love and pleasant rapes. Electric summons of the busy bell brings brisk Amanda to destroy the spell. Leaving the bubbling beverage to cool, Fresca slips softly to the needful stool, where the pathetic tale of Richardson eases her labour till the deed is done. This ended, to the steaming bath she moves, her tresses fanned by little fluttering loves. Odours confected by the cunning French disguise a good old hearty female stench. So, yeah, I think we can agree with Pound that the poem lost nothing by the cancellation of lines such as this. Pound also advised Eliot to get rid of something which was over the top in the section between the typist and the young man carbuncular. The section was much longer and more laborious. Some lines which were cancelled here. A bright kimono wraps her as she sprawls in nerveless torpor on the window seat. A touch of art is given by the false Japanese print purchased in Oxford Street. It seems Pound found the idea of these Japanese things difficult to believe, difficult to accept as real in such seedy lodgings, and he advised Eliot to get rid of them, which he did. However, the most famous, perhaps significant change relates to something that, or part of something that was left in the poem. So the end of the encounter between the young man and the typist's clerk bestows one final patronizing kiss and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. However, that's where it ends in the published poem. However, Eliot had 2 extra lines, and at the corner where the stable is, delays only to urinate and spit. It seems that Pound told Eliot that the last 2 lines were probably over the mark, and Eliot cancelled them. Something else that Pound did was to convince Eliot to cancel some short poems that he had between the sections of the individual parts of the poem. And there was some anti-Semitic material here, something about return to poor Bleistein. Remember him, the Bleistein with the Baedeker. Lustreless protrusive eye stares from the protozoic slime at a perspective of Canaletto. Well, here there is more anti-Jewish material, so full fathom 5 your Bleistein lies, under the flatfish and the squids, graves disease in a dead Jew's eyes, where the crabs have ate the lids. That is lace that was his nose, roll him gently side to side, see the lips unfold, unfold, from the teeth gold in gold. So Pound criticised this, not for its anti-Semitism, but just because he said it didn't add anything to the poem and made it messy, and it made it more difficult to follow the major themes. So he advised Eliot to cut it out, cut all these small poems between the sections out, and Eliot followed his advice. Pound said to Eliot he'd already written the longest poem in the English language, and he didn't need to bust all records by prolonging it 3 pages further. So these are very significant changes to the poem. The section Death by Water was reduced from 92 lines to about 10. So what we have now is just the section about Phlebas the Phoenician. But there was originally a whole satirical section about a sailor on shore leave and getting drunk and getting into trouble, and it was set up in quatrains at the beginning with which rhymed A B, and later on kind of turned into a sort of Tennysonian type blank verse, which was the basis of a monologue. At the end of that section, the sailor is in his ship and is shipwrecked and dies, and then finally there is a section about Phlebas the Phoenician. Pound told Eliot to get rid of everything except the 9 or 10 lines about Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, and he said all the rest of it was just a digression and didn't add anything to the poem and was confusing, and the poem would be better without it. Eliot kind of reluctantly conceded this, but he asked Pound if it wouldn't be better to get rid of the section on Phlebas as well, and Pound quite rightly said no, because definitely need the section about Phlebas. It refers to it connects together the section about the drowned Phoenician sailor and Madame Sesostris and the fake kind of phony Madame Blavatsky type prophecy of the future. But it also connects with the real prophecy of the final section of the poem, part 5. So he told Eliot, no, you really have to keep Phlebas in the poem, and that's why we have such a short section for death by water. So we can see this profound work which Pound did to shape the poem, a work which made it far more concise, a piece of poetry whose themes about the barren nature of modern life stood out much more keenly than in the original. It's also worth saying that Eliot always praised Pound's poem Hugh Selwyn Marbley very highly, and the themes of the two poems are kind of similar. Both poets were working in and living in London for this period of time, and they both were talking about the political and artistic wasteland of Europe, with London at the centre, the place that they were. And both of those poems have that probably, or certainly as a theme, and that fragmentary, elusive, modernist style that Eliot uses in the wasteland is definitely something that he gets an idea for, I think, from Hugh Selwyn Marbley, which is also very elusive and very fragmentary, and also very full of past culture. So these two poems have a lot in common, and I'm sure that Eliot saw Pound's poem as a precursor. So all in all, we can see the profound difference that Pound made to Eliot's wasteland, and he was sure himself of the fact that he had improved it immensely, claiming that Ezra was the one who had done the Caesarian, had given birth to the poem in a Caesarian way. So he wasn't the author of the poem. He wasn't the person who had connected all these themes and ideas and words together. He was the midwife who had given birth to the poem in a difficult way. So he understood his role, and Eliot later praised Pound for being someone who could help someone with a poem or some artistic piece without imposing his own ideas on it. Eliot says, quite rightly, I think, that it's very difficult for a poet to read and help another poet without rewriting the poem in the kind of way that he would have done it himself if he'd wanted to write that poem. But he says about Pound that he had the ability to really keep himself out of it and help the poet to realize his own vision. So this is a profound contribution to the final form of the poem that that Pound made, and Eliot never forgot his contribution. And when he was in trouble with the American government many years later, after his speeches in favor of fascism, it was Eliot, among others, who did so much to help Pound. Also, the letters show that when Pound became depressed, Eliot tried to lift his mood by telling him just what a great poet he was, and how the way he had helped so many great writers of the century made him the most seminal and most important artistic figure of the century. And in some ways, I think Eliot might have been right. So yeah, I think we can see that Pound's Caesarian operation made The Wasteland the poem that it is, actually, and turned it into the first masterpiece of modernist poetry. And the contribution of old Ezra cannot be exaggerated. It would not have been the same poem without his contribution.